a project that we started in 1970, looking at lava flows on the Big Island. So, and that's the sound of a lava flow going down or another slope. You'll see some photos of that too. But it does sound like that underwater, the lava flows. So anyway, there was a team of us. It was kind of a shoestring operation. We didn't really have a boat for most of the time, and when we did our surveys, we basically just went offshore, do surf, and where we could do. And we tried to go through, find all the lava flows over the last century that were dated, and we knew where they were. And then the other thing that I did was I worked on 2 boat harbors. And the difference here is that the lava flows were all at different times. So the lava flow is a different strategy. We were able to put permanent transects down and visit it over time, so we're actually in the same habitat. So what I was talking about, so we basically visited 7 dated lava flows. We looked for them. One of them didn't work out because we couldn't distinguish the control site and the lava on the flow sites. And then we also examined a flow that was going into the ocean at the time we were looking at it, which we'll talk about at the end of the talk. And then the two boat harbors. And these are the calculations that we looked at, the area. We converted length of corals within a quadrat and converted it to area. And then we also collected information on the data of the species. And then from there we try to look at a number of things, a number of species, species per site, coral abundance, and as well as Shannon-Weaver index of diversity and evenness. These are all pretty well known now. And these are all the sites are located. The top 3 on the left side are the 2 boat harbors and Kapoho, and then where we actually succeeded in doing the surveys were down at the south end around to the Puna side on the east coast. So these are the 2 boat harbors and Kapoho. And it was great. Well, it's too bad we didn't have GPS and Google Earth, because it's really easy to see the lava flows now compared to what we had working for us 43 years ago when we started this survey. But this is Kapoho, and I hope that at some point, this is the oldest dated lava flow we have on the island, Kapoho, and I think we could probably go and do a survey there at some point, and somebody will do it. And it would be important because it's the oldest one. So these are the down at the southern end of Kona, and there's 3 flows that we looked at there: the 1950, 1926, and 1868 flows. And on the Puna Ka'u side, we had the 1955, 1960. 1970, 72 lava flows, a live one, and then the other one down there. So this is the youngest flow that we looked at. So we went to the site, and we established both what we call a control site or a reference site where there wasn't a flow, and then on the flow itself, and make comparisons between the 2. And this is some of the photos we took. After just 1 year, there's not much that you can see as far as corals because they're too small. There's probably corals in the photo, and so a couple of them are here. This is a Price compressor coral that somehow has grown pretty quickly in that 1 year period. And there's a small coral of Poslopora. And over here is a lot of algae, moss animals, all kinds of stuff. So not much coral after 1 year. What was interesting though is that the flow went around a lot of islands of the living corals, and they were not destroyed. In fact, the lava flow basically disintegrated into black sand, but yet the other corals were alive. So they seem to cool off pretty fast. When the flows come down, they cooled off. And this is showing, again, another 1969 lava flow a year later. So that was a pretty good size fossil flora there. Now this is really interesting. So here's a lava flow coming down the slope, and right next to it are springer corals, Porites compressa, and they were not affected. So basically they're in a flow mode, and then all of a sudden they freeze, and they're not hot anymore because the water pretty much cools them off really quickly. And again, islands, sand being pulverized, the flow being pulverized. So basically there was, as you can see from this site, there wasn't a whole lot of corals at the lava site compared to the control site. Hardly any. And there was 33% on the control site here. Okay, so the second youngest flow was the Kapoho 1960 flow. Now we couldn't get a boat there because it was too rough. So we had to basically take all of our gear and walk through the surf to get to the site out here. And I got knocked down 3 times. It was really something. But we managed to get out to the flow. And so this Kapoho flow was a huge flow. It actually changed quite a bit the island area. There was a town there that disappeared at the time. So this, at that time, this would be a 10-year-old flow. And you can see that the Pocillopora is pretty big here. And this is how, it was a lot of turbidity in the, at the site, maybe because there was a disintegration of the lava. And so you can see how we're doing this. We use a ruler. Rick Grigg would be putting his finger on the length of it, and then I would write down the species and the data. So this is how we did it, 2 people. So this is showing what the Kapoho site looked like after 10 years. It's pretty rough and ready, and a lot of turbidity in the air. And that's me on the left side. And you can see we had pretty primitive scuba gear at that time. They didn't invent BCs. We didn't have computers, and we just had finally got pressure gauges. At that time, before that, we had these little things, these levers that went up and down. So it was pretty dicey in the good old days. So this is 1960. You can see that there's a mixed Porites as well as Pocillopora. So quite a bit of coral cover here. But it's still, percent cover is only 1%. And I think one of the reasons in this case is that it's such hard surf that pretty much controls not only what's on the lava flow, but on the control sites. So it was really a heavy-duty, wave-controlled area, and so there wasn't that much in the way of development of corals. So then they went to the Kahena 1955 lava flow. Now we're behind the trade winds, and so we're in a more calm place, 1955. And unfortunately, we couldn't jump off this cliff and get into the water, so we had a boat, thank God, for this site. And you can see there's a lot more coral cover here. It's unbelievable. And this is only 15 years after the flow, and a tremendous amount of Pocillopora and also Porites. This is on the flow. And this is me. Sid Townsley was the 3rd member of the team that was also on the team and mostly taking photos. And this is the lava flow from that coming off of the shoreline into the deep water. This photo here. Again, and what's interesting here is the Pocillopora are evenly distributed. When thinking that the trapezia corals that try to maintain this were already there on these corals. So now we're in a situation where the percent covers are almost the same after 15 years. And also there was one two of the corals are actually more abundant, Passiflora meandrina on the flow, and Montipora flavellata. Both of those were higher on the flow than they were on the control side. So now we're moving to Ho'okena. This is the 1950 flow. This is from Mauna Loa, and there were 3 forks of the flow, and we picked the middle one. So this is the middle flow, is the biggest one. But there were 2 others, and it would be good if somebody come back and do the survey again to actually look at all 3 flows, because it's a great opportunity to see the variation between the 3. So here we got not so much high, even though we're on the lee side of the Kona side, there still wasn't a lot of coral cover here. We didn't have an explanation as to why, but you can see the percent cover is still higher on the control side compared to the lava side, but there were higher levels of Passiflora and Latastria. So Miloli'i, now this is further down on the Kona coast. It's also a site of an ancient Hawaiian village. It's still there. Fantastic lava flow. And as you can see, now that we're looking at it at the time, that would be a 44-year-old lava flow here. And you can see Montipora capitata is huge. It has Parietes compressa. These are kind of climax species, and they tend to monopolize the bottom. And so we were hoping to find something like this, and it was pretty similar to the control side. And here's Parietes lobata, and then there's some places where you had Passiflora as other corals. So this is a pretty spectacular spot. A lot of variation in the habitat. Again, this is just showing the degree of coral cover after just 44 years. So now, if we look at the percent cover, the control site is still higher than the lava flow site, but the lava flow site is pretty substantial. And you can see the variety of corals that are on the control side, and there's still quite a few, but not as many on the flow side. 3 of the corals, though, Passiflora meandrina, Montipora capitata, and Montipora patula, were all higher on the lava flow compared to the control site. So the last one here is Wai'a Pukini, 1868 lava flow. And it was a really interesting place because right at that spot, there's a staircase. The flow's on a staircase, and it looks like it's on a fault zone or something. Every so many years, it drops. The sea level drops, and it creates another place where the waves can create another flat place. So it was very strange. This is the site of where we came in the water. We had to take a jeep to get down here, and then we just went off from this spot right here. We didn't get very many good photos. My camera went make, and as a result, we tried to go back again, but we got distracted and we never were able to get back and get some good photos there. But as you can see, it's pretty similar, the percent coral cover, but there are now more sites on the lava flow compared to the control site. And especially Parietes lobata is really much higher on the lava side. So this is now just a summary tables here. This shows the number of the species from the youngest to oldest sites at both the control site and the lava site. What's interesting, the number of coral species goes up on all of the sites, the lava flow sites. But at the control sites, there's a peak at about 44 years and drops down again. And that might be partially due to the fact that on that 44 site, there was high coral cover that outcompetes other smaller corals, and that reduces the number of species. Now this is the total coral cover. In all cases, there was still more coral cover on the control sites than on the lava flow sites. So it still takes more time to reach the point of equilibrium here, not even for 100 years. And I wanted just to point out another thing. Pocillopora meandrina seems to be a different type of coral. It's sort of a pioneer species in that they put out a lot more larvae in the beginning. They're branching, but they have a limited or determinate growth. So they don't grow about 40 centimeters, but it gives them the advantage of getting there first and even hanging on after the other larger corals show up. And this is the Shannon Weaver index. Pretty much follows the species richness on the sites. Again, there's a drop towards the end here, probably due to competition between the different species of coral. And this is the succession. So what we have here is Pocillopora on the lava flow. It's the first to get there, and it maintains itself. It goes up a peak, and when the other corals start getting more abundant, it still drops, but doesn't drop all the way down like a pioneer species. And then after that, you can see Porites takes off, and that's the dominant coral on the lava flows, but it drops because of other factors such as wave action. And then Montipora shows up later on, and then all the rest of them show up later on. So you can see the succession here. Some of the corals never get there, and it takes time, and especially Montipora doesn't get there right away and makes a name for itself, so to speak. Okay, so that's pretty much for the lava flows. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the boat harbors. This is Honokahau Boat Harbor, which is, as you can see, it was an inland harbor, so it created new habitat that was lava, except it wasn't a lava flow, it was dredged that way. And unfortunately, they expanded the harbor in 1968. This is the original harbor. I wish it had stayed that way, because then it made it change, because there was a change in the environment halfway through the study. So what we did here, in this case, I surveyed this harbor 6 times over a 20-year period. And I wanted to do it again, but I just ran out of time, I guess, time to move on. But I wanted to do another survey, say 30 years, or actually 40 years. So that would be a good thing to do. So perfect site to be looking at that. So this is the 1-year period. There's nothing that you can see much in terms, maybe 100 small corals in the entire harbor after 1 year. And then if you look at the 1973, which is 3 years after it was constructed, you're starting to get corals. That's a Montipora coral there. And then by 1976, they're getting pretty big. Pocillopora meandrina. And this is 1981, so that's 11 years. So these, again, some more 11-year photos and more fish. And there were other people studying these other invertebrates and corals, and fish. So this is 1991, and it's unbelievable. The coral cover is just massive. And so it was, in that period, 20 years, it was growing pretty quickly. And the advantage of being in the harbor in this case is that you're not getting the wave action. You're not getting the northwest swells because it's on the windward side. And it's fairly good, clean, it's a pretty clean harbor. So this is just a relative abundance of corals because it's hard to estimate the total amount. So again, the same patterns. You got Pocillopora starting high, but because of what I feel the construction change that was in the middle of the survey did affect the Pocillopora. It's more sensitive to sedimentation, and that's probably why it plummeted more than it did on the lava flows. And then as you can see, the other corals, same pattern, not much. And so there is some commonality here. And this is the Shannon Weaver index. So it went up steadily, and in terms of coral cover, and the diversity index didn't do that much of a change. A little bit of a peak. So it's not quite the same as on the lava flows. So the last harbor I looked at, I didn't do a real detailed survey here. It was built in 1960. It's on the northwest side of the Big Island. And when I went there in 1969, which was 9 years, there wasn't much happening in the harbor. But I went back in 1991. It was unbelievable. There was a huge coral reef there. It was totally a climax community levels place. And I think the reason why is that the harbor itself protected the corals from the northwest swell. Otherwise, when you go outside, there's hardly any corals. And the other thing, it brought the fish. So it was a really spectacular to see this. So I really didn't do any surveys, but you can just tell from the degree of development, it was pretty spectacular. So, okay, so the last thing I want to talk about here is diving on a live lava flow. And so we were there during the eruption, at the Halima'o eruption in 1972. This is where we were at. And I want to mention, since 1969, 1970, it's been continually erupting. So for 40-something years, it has not stopped erupting. And so it's hard to figure out, if you're going to come back and do surveys here, and it's going to be difficult to figure out who's on first, and you know, as far as which is the older ones and the younger ones. But still, it was it's an incredible thing that's going on there. So the way we did this, you know, when you're young and you're immortal. So what we did is we went down to about 30, 40 feet off the flow. And we know that what's happening when the lava comes down the slope, it heats up and the hot water goes up to the surface. So as long as you don't have to go up at the lava flow, you're okay. But again, we had pressure gauges, and that was really important. I wasn't going to go without that. So we know when time to go. So this is some of the photos that were taken during the 1972. There was glows, and it's pillow lavas, and they're going down the slope, and it's this huge talus slope of all these pillow lavas going down hundreds of feet on its maximum angle of repose when we were there. I mean, it was just a huge cliff, and we couldn't see the bottom. But the thing that was spectacular was the noise. So I hope that at some point somebody gets a good microphone, and the noise is incredible. You can feel the hissing and cracks and pops and explosions. It hits your lungs. You can feel it, and it was just something that I would never forget. And it would just be great if somebody could, if they're crazy enough to go back out there and do these surveys. But you can see here that here's this one is exploding here, and you see the bubbles coming off. This one's just heading straight down the slope on that talus slope, and this one's also starting to erupt here. And this one, you can see a big bubble, so that's the gas coming off as it interacts with the. So we're about 30, 35, 40 feet. And you can see the glow, and the glow will last maybe up to 30 seconds or more. And then we had cocky guys, you know, they want to come right over there and touch it and see if it hurts. I'm not going to mention any names, but that's not me there. Craziness. So this is one part of the flow. So this is what's interesting here is covering older flows being covered by a lava here. So look, we made a couple of more dives. So this is the last dive I made here. We got a little cocky again. We wanted to get closer to the flow to get it close of it, you know, going into the water. So here we are, and we're getting a little bit closer. And we're very close, and it's very warm there. And the engine burned up on the boat. So we had 16-foot Boston whaler. It had a little kicker on it, a 20 horsepower. It didn't go dead. So fortunately the wind was offshore, and what we did, it was going 3 knots. We had to go all the way to Poho'iki, which was 35 miles away. So when we went past Kaimu Beach and Kalapana, 2 of the guys put a tank on their back, one around their arm. We had 10 tanks and 4 people, and so what happened was we were able to lighten the boat, and it went up all the way up to 5 knots. And it took us 8.5 hours to get to Pohoiki, and nothing bad happened, thank God. So, one other thing that's really important, that talus slope that I mentioned before, 20 years later, there were 6 people on that floe, and it cut loose. It slid down the slope, and it entrained 6 divers with them, and it went down to 250 feet. Everybody's earbrum popped, but they all came up to the surface and survived. So the reason I'm telling you this, don't do this. It's not a good idea. So just take it for granted that the stuff is happening, and you know, bad things can happen out there. So anyway, these are the other members of the team. Many of them passed already. Keith Che, Dietzy Che, Rick Grigg, Rick Ginther, Bob Johannes, Allison Kay, myself, Ken Roy, Stephen Smith, and Dick Screw, and Sid Townsley. So just want to honor their participation. These are the references. These are pretty much all low references, old references, because there's not much more that has been going on since that time. So thank you very much.